Up until mid-March, I still thought I'd be rushing deadlines with my friends in the library, thanking my tutors after our last revision seminars and graduating in July. But about a week later, the UK was in full-on panic mode. No Tesco, Aldi, Sainsbury's or Morrison's had toilet paper left. All the people who'd been attacking Asians like myself for wearing masks and drinking bat soup were hoarding N95s instead of donating them to the NHS. Then Boris Johnson himself got coronavirus! Hong Kong, however, had been flattening the curve. No local cases for a week, then 2, then 3. Everyone's wearing masks, which made wearing masks effective. Gel disinfectant dispensers were everywhere. All of these I grew up with because Hong Kong wasn't the same after SARS. It was safer. No one would try to rip your mask off of you if you wore it to school when you have a cold. And no, it's not just a K-fashion thing. I decided to fly back knowing I had to be in mandatory quarantine for 14 days, be tested once I land, and I'd get a call the day after if I got it. But before I boarded, I needed advice. There were no instructions anywhere on how to fly in a pandemic. I know it's better to be safe than sorry. I'm really not emotionally prepared. I think I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. The basics I needed were a rain poncho, safety goggles, disposable gloves, a shower cap, face masks, and hand gel. My friends gave me strict directions. No eating or drinking on board. Definitely avoid the toilet. One of them didn't move a muscle throughout their 16-hour flight. Almost all of my friends had someone on their flight test positive for COVID-19, and one of them was sitting 3 rows in front of her. Armed with all these horror stories and a visit to the depot later, I was ready to go. If you thought the dead quiet streets were apocalyptic, the airport was truly something you'd see in 28 Days Later, warm bodies, Shaun of the Dead or Zombieland, save the debris and an occasional corpse. The check-in counter quadruple checked if I was a Hong Kong resident because no one else was allowed back. There was a single lane for every stage of the boarding process and no queues. When I finally got to the waiting area, where gated dark restaurants and cafes surrounded rows and rows of empty chairs, I found hordes of other passengers donning the same outfit as I was. Then, imagine social distancing on the plane. Every passenger was separated by a 2-seat radius. I slept across 3 chairs and inhaled my meal, failing to starve myself for the 12-hour flight and praying the virus wouldn't hitch a ride in the 3 sips of water I had the entire time. I did succeed in holding my pee in for 20 hours though, from an hour before the flight to when I arrived in quarantine. By then, I'd rationed out the 5 pairs of disposable gloves I brought for the journey. I'd been wearing my mask for 6 hours. When we waited to get off the plane, a government official overrode the broadcast system to warn us that if we violated the quarantine order, we'd face a maximum fine of 25,000 Hong Kong dollars and half a year in jail. Mind you, I hadn't peed for around 13 hours by then, and to my horror as well as relief, there were 5 rounds of health checks. First, a temperature monitoring CCTV camera, which had me quaking because I was worried my CDC cosplay had overheated me after my friend told me it happened to them. Second, a stall to fill out 3 forms for the health department and download a quarantine tracker app. Third, a bracelet installation booth. Fourth, an activation station. Fifth was syncing the app. Then, health department officials interrogated us about where we planned to quarantine, whether we had food stocks, and how we'll be transported there. We were taken onto a bus, and a day or 2 before I landed, the government began requiring anyone who arrived to take mandatory COVID-19 tests at Asia World Expo, where I took my SATs 4 years ago and saw Lady Gaga live when I was 12. We were driven to the big arena compound place, and an official took my bags. They gestured for me to follow the signs. I headed to a counter where 2 officials with face shields behind a plastic barrier filled out my forms. They handed me a number, demonstrated how to give a sample, directed me to a sea of empty seats, each a meter apart. I sat down and watched 3 massive screens loop a tutorial of how to spit into a cup. I wanted to cough so badly from dehydration, but I didn't dare to because, just imagine, coughing in a COVID-19 test center. It's like shouting bomb on a plane. A man announced my number. It felt like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. I walked across the hall to him, and he told me to ditch the gloves and wash my hands with disinfectant on a table next to him. Then he took me to another massive hall. There were rows and rows and rows of white plastic barricades, each surrounding a little booth for arrivals to give their samples. Then I was let out, and there were my parents, who I couldn't hug for another 2 weeks. They took me to the hotel where I would be quarantined. I didn't want to be at home in case I actually ended up infecting the rest of my family. What surprised me most was how relieved I was that people were scared. They kept 2 meters away from me, and even my brother, who screamed when he had to lift my suitcase out of the car. The entire 45-minute ride to the hotel, I only saw 2 people who weren't wearing masks on the street. Both of them were joggers. All I felt was relief. There's actually nothing more nerve-wracking right now than taking my temperature every day and praying that it doesn't exceed 37 degrees Celsius. The 14 days I spent in one room walking less than 10 steps a day were a bit of a blur, to say the least. They say time is a human construct made to give life meaning, and I felt that in quarantine. Every day I took my temperature twice, prayed the government wouldn't call me because they'd only do that if it was a positive result, showered with my tracker on, pulled the curtains open to let natural light in through the frosted window so I wouldn't lose my mind. I drank more water than I've ever had in the past 2 years and went to sleep to the humming noises of air being ventilated. Then one day, I was listening to the hallway, and the person living across from me had violated their quarantine order, so I heard a bunch of police officers come in and basically escort them away. After some intense eavesdropping and feeling like a suburban southern housewife gathering ammo for an afternoon tea spilling sesh, I found out that the girl had left her room the whole night, came back in the morning, and brought guests in with her. It was all caught on camera, which the police had access to because everyone had to sign a waiver for that when they checked in. She was escorted to a quarantine center by more than 10 police officers and fully geared health department officials in scrubs, caps, gloves, and masks. Other people learned how to do TikTok dances during the pandemic, or how to make dalgona coffee, or knit a sweater for their dog, or keep their cool when in lockdown with their entire extended family. What I learned was how fundamental trust has become in conquering the pandemic, and how easily it could be violated because of greed. The case of the girl who lived across me made it clear that there are people who, despite over 1 million lives lost, continue to be violently selfish, ignorant, and cavalier because it doesn't concern them. It hasn't hurt the people closest to them. It hasn't occurred to them how easy they'd contract it, not know they have it, and pass it on to others. The power of collective cooperation and the true intensity of fear hasn't hit them yet, and maybe it never will. But it's not just at the level of individual trust. Donald Trump's encouraging his supporters to protest lockdown orders against the advice of his own administration. The UK's COVID-19 death toll has been criticised multiple times for underestimations and miscalculations. Hong Kong, of course, is no stranger to harbouring distrust towards its government. After all, it's time and time again defended its police force for abusing innocent civilians. And as much as I know that Hong Kong's quarantine system is far better than lots of other countries, seeing our longest streak of not having any local cases has been 23 days, there's multiple times I could have violated quarantine without the government knowing. The commute to the hotel was never checked, during which the tracker wasn't on yet and I could have gone about town doing whatever I wanted. Daily temperature taking wasn't mandatory, and I could have lied to the hotel if I had symptoms when they called to check in with me. Also, my wrist was small enough for the tracker to be yanked off unscathed. Even if I was quarantined at home and had the virus, my family could leave the house and spread it out. If my outfit for the flight isn't proof enough of how scared I was, I didn't do any of that. But I stayed in not because I trusted the government, but out of fear for the lives of my family and myself. Even they were scared when I was let out after 14 days, because there had been reports that symptoms could show on the 15th day after incubation, or 21st, or 28th. And I'd rather they were afraid than fearless, because the trust the government sought from its people, and vice versa, couldn't be met in a city like this. That bridge had long been burned back in June last year. What the pandemic has done is make governments and their citizens realize the importance of trust, and how easily it can be broken.